but now I've clicked it. Hello and welcome back to my super curious channel. My name is Linda Mocco and I am here for this month's new subject with my guest Dean Meadows in North Carolina, USA. Yeah, I'll let you introduce yourself again if you don't mind doing that. This is our second video for today, so for us it's like we already did this part, but let's do it again. Dean, welcome.
Hey, it's good to be back again. My name is Dean Meadows. For all those who maybe didn't see the first video, Dean Meadows. I'm the preacher at the Gastonia Church of Christ in North Carolina, USA. I'm also co-founder of the nonprofit organization Apologia Institute, where our goal is to equip Christians to engage culture. And as always, it is great to be here and discuss these very interesting foundational and important topics with Linda, who, by the way, is an amazing host.
Oh, thank you, Dean. And Dean is a wonderful guest. Yes, so I'm Linda Mocco and I am from Helsinki, Finland. That's where I'm live streaming from. And I am really interested in all things that have to do with how we are here, how this universe came to be, all the really interesting questions, especially when it comes down to belief and why we hold those beliefs to be true. And is there any way we can know or figure out the truth of the matters? Today, we have a title on our conversation, and the title is, Can We Be Good Without God? And I thought I would break down that title from my perspective, because in response to God claims, and we've got God in the title, as Dean has defined it in previous conversations, my position is that I'm atheist. I lack the belief in those God claims. Again, when it's a question of what I know to be true, in that regard, I'm an agnostic. I see that I have no way of really knowing. But when it comes to my belief, I am atheist. I have a lack of belief in these gods that are presented, and specifically for today, in the God that Dean has defined for us before. So the question, can we be good without God? To me, when I say that out loud, being true to my worldview and my skepticism, it kind of sounds like, can we be good without this belief in a thing that we don't know to be true? And so the obvious answer is, of course we can. So for me, it would be like, I would just drop off the word God and ask the question, can we be good? And probably even more importantly for me, and the way I see the world, it's how can we be good? And what does it mean to be good for humanity and for our society? Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah. So I'll ask you, Dean, first to define your, like, oh, yeah, sorry. I just jumped over a thing there and then I noticed that, yeah. So, Dean, would you please define morality, or say a few words about that?
Okay.
And then,
well, for the core definition, I think that you're right. Morality is conduct relating to principles of right and wrong. As far as the worldview that I take, here's a shocker. It's the Christian worldview. And what I mean by that is the following, is that morality, moral values and duties are objective. And what I mean by objective is that they are independent and binding on all people for all time. What I mean by values and duties is just how we view one another, the value that we place on individual people, and also the obligations that we have to be good to one another. And I believe those are grounded, anchored in God.
Right, that's really interesting. So you have the Christian worldview. I'm just saying this back to see if I got it right, and please correct me if I'm mistaken in any way. You hold a Christian worldview, and you see that moral values are objective and that they are the same for all time. And that's where my first question would come in is, so you see that these moral values are the same for all time. So in a time before human beings, were there such a thing as moral values? My question.
Were there such a thing as moral values? I think that those moral values were in the mind frame of, in the mindset of God. Sure, because God, as the maximal being, it's not that he kind of has to go out and purchase love or purchase justice. His very nature is to be loving, is to be just, is to be good, is to be benevolent. So since God is an eternal being, then yes, you could in a sense say that those things were before human beings. So yeah.
Okay, so God is moral in himself. And did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, that God as the maximally great being, it's not that he has to go and find love, right, or find justice. He himself is by in his nature the barometer, the meter stick for love. He is the measuring stick for love. He is good. I guess that's the best way that I can describe it. His very nature is to be maximally just, to be maximally love. As John 1:4 talks about, that God is love. So yeah,
okay,
he's the anchor point for all that.
Okay, I think I see what you mean there. And how do you arrive at your moral values? How does the God's moral, the objective moral, those things that are moral, how do you get to them? How do you arrive at them? How do you suss them out?
Yeah, so I think that there's three things that are involved in that. I think one, I think God has written those things on mankind's heart, so or mankind's conscious, so to speak. And so I think first, we all have what I like to call a moral sense experience, right? That we all intuitively appeal to this idea of right and wrong. So I think that's part of it. But I also think, revelation can play a part in our moral values and duties. If God has revealed himself in the text of Scripture, then that's one way to know moral values and duties. And to go back to the first one, since those things are intuitively true of mankind, it also takes place in the training of people, such as parents training kids. I know that's one of the questions that you've got. I don't want to step in on that, but I think that's one way that we arrive at our moral values and duties, is that we have this moral sense experience that's innate in us.
So it's innate in us, and God has, as you said, written it on mankind's heart and in our conscious. So
yeah, I think Romans, I'm going to take a stab at it. I think it's Romans 9 that talks about that.
Right. And how do I know, or is that the answer to this question?
Yeah.
But I'll ask the question first so I don't assume too much.
Okay.
How do I know that the conscience that I feel, that like written on my heart, is quite poetic. I'm thinking that it's like I can feel it. I can feel. I have a sensation. I have a conscience. Things feel right or they feel wrong. How do I know that that is from God?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think that, and this is probably going to get into some of my time, but I'll go ahead and address it. I think that if objective morals and moral values and duties do not exist, then I don't think that God would exist, because you wouldn't have an anchor point for that. But we know that objective moral values and duties do exist, so it seems that God does exist. And so in that question, the way in which you know that they are from God, twofold. One, and this is just me personally, I don't know of any other apologists that might hold this position, but I think that everybody, whether they know it or not, appeals to objective moral values and duties. And so in appealing to objective moral values and duties, they're appealing, whether they know it or not, they're appealing to a objective moral values and duties lawgiver. And the way in which they know that is either through the process of discovering it for themselves, in their moral sense experience and appealing to it, and then finding out that those come from God, or they can do it through revelation, right? Through the study of Scripture, or through a conversation with their fellow human being. So, in those manners, in those ways, I think people, whether they know it or not, appeal to a central anchor point for objective moral values and duties, or they can look in revelation as far as Scripture to figure that out.
No, I didn't hear the end of your comment.
Okay. Or they can appeal to Scripture also to come to that conclusion. So
let me repeat it, because there was a little bit of feedback or interference with the sound. Did you say that everybody can come to objective values, that everybody appeals to objective values, and we can come to that either by ourselves, like amongst ourselves, our human societies? Am I understanding that correct? Or is that like personally I see something as objective? Because I think for something to be objective, it would have to be more than just my idea of it. So I'm just putting that in there to kind of clarify what I find unclear.
Yeah.
Are you saying that everybody can create, appeals to objective values, either man-made or by revelation, which would be God-made or transmitted from God?
Yeah, I would amend what you said in this way, that everybody appeals to objective moral values and duties, whether they know it or not. And so whether they know it or not, they're appealing to an ultimate lawgiver. So for instance, let me give an example. So for instance, you and your husband, me and my wife are walking down the road in, I'll go in America, because I don't want to disparage Finland in this way. And we're walking down, and then all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, someone jumps out in front of us and holds a gun, to me, and it says, "Hey, give me your wallet." And I say, "No, I'm not going to give you the wallet." And they shoot me, right? You, your husband, my wife, and me being shot would all agree that somebody just did something wrong, right? And so in saying that action is wrong, we are appealing to a standard. And so the question is, like C.S. Lewis said, it roughly said, I wanted to hate God, but then I had to ask myself the question, on what basis or on what anchor point do I establish this definition of hate? So in that sense, we all appeal to objective moral values and duties. Now, how do we know that those are from God? Well, I think maybe let me say it this way. One can be revelation, and two, it can be the systematic deduction of other ethical views that don't work. So maybe that's kind of the way that I frame it. Does that make sense?
The last bit I wasn't exactly sure. Maybe if I could just ask this question, then I think it should come through through that maybe, or be clearer for me. So everybody appeals to objective values, whether we know it or not. My question is, would it be possible to attain objective values through humans? Could objective values be man-made, so to speak?
Could they be man-made?
Mm-hmm.
In what sense do you mean, like constructed by societies and whatnot?
Yeah, like for example, with the robber on the street, that we conclude that we together do not want to live in a society that it's not beneficial for society to be robbed or to be shot. Gotcha. And so we together, we say that your wife and my husband, the four of us, we decide that that's how we want our society to be. And yeah, anybody who disagrees with that is going to be a problem for our society, because we won't be able to flourish.
Okay, so let me do this, and I know this is going to sound like a cop-out, but I promise you it's not. That gets into some of the questions that I have for you. So is it okay to put that specific on the back burner for when I ask my questions? Because I
say just go for it. I'm okay with us kind of not following the script too.
No, that's fine. No, see, and here's my my point is that without an objective reference point for what good and bad is, I don't necessarily know that you could ever arrive at really saying what's really wrong and what's really right. I mean, what if there is a society in which, for instance, one society says something's right, one society says something's wrong? How do you adjudicate between those two societies about what is right and what is wrong?
If you're asking me that question, I would have to say it ultimately, to me, comes down to education and knowledge and knowing more about our world. I think whenever a society does things to harm itself, it usually comes from lack of understanding of what actually makes society flourish. So I think different societies actually, like, I understand you're asking that possibly a bit more philosophically, like how does one know outside of these two societies which is better? Yeah, but my honest answer to that would be to study and to see what actually is better for society. I mean, like, there have been times when we did not think, as a Finnish society, for example, we did not think it was valuable for women to be able to vote. And I do think that is also a moral issue, because I think it's wrong not to allow women to vote. And when we had more information and more knowledge, and men were educated about how intelligent women can be, and women had a chance to educate themselves, that changed. We reevaluated the situation, and we made a conscious judgment on that it is in fact moral to allow women to vote.
So my question on that is, it seems like I guess my response to that question would be is why is on an atheistic viewpoint, or even as you've mentioned in your questions to me, and even live, you said that you're uh, you're a humanist. So even on humanism, why, or atheism, why is it a good thing that women vote? I mean, and I don't mean that disparagingly, but how do you anchor that? What if there's a society that has decided that the best way to move forward and to flourish is for women not to vote, leave the governing to just men, and allow the women to be responsible for merely producing children? Why is that society? Why would that society be wrong, and this society that we've created be right? And on what grounds can this society that we've talked about, that has women voting, on what grounds do they have the right to tell another society how to act morally with regards to women?
The right, just at the very end there, the right to impose maybe a moral value that one society has come to. Is it right to do that with other societies?
Yeah. So why is it right, or why is it right for this society over here, which says it's a good thing that women have the right to vote, right? And the society over here on the other society that we've created, it says no, women are going to be homemakers, women are going to be responsible for birthing children, and men are going to be the ones that run government. What right does the society that allows women to vote, on what right, what basis, what justification do they have for looking at this other society and saying, no, you can't do that, that's not right? Why is that not right on atheism or on humanism? Why is that not right?
Well, with atheism, it's just that I don't have the God view, so I don't have any belief that there is any information there that I need to go and seek for any moral guidance, really. So there is really no atheistic morality to speak of. So the positive, the way I go about reflecting on and gathering my morality, so to speak, is through is like, it's very pragmatic. Like, we do what works. So again, I would just answer, I think I almost said that before, that we see what works. And of course, if one society is closed and everybody in that society, women included, are of the opinion that it's great for us to live this way, where women cannot vote and possibly cannot get educated, because I am suspecting that that would be necessary for women not to fight for the right to vote. But that's just me assuming there. But yeah, that would be that society's choice and their reality at that moment. Now, to have a look at it objectively from the outside and compare with another society, I guess that's exactly what one would do, that you compare and you see, does a society flourish when women do have rights to vote, when women are a part of the political milieu in that society. If we don't allow women to vote, we're cutting off half of the brains and the capacity of that society, and also women will not be represented as well. So yeah, I think it's pragmatic. It works. Now, I think it's a different issue if it's right to oppose that on another society that one is not a part of. Although I do believe that and this is my belief, if you notice that something is good for everybody, and you see, from my perspective, if hypothetically that society did exist where women do not have the right to vote, I see that, I make the judgment that these women are oppressed. They are having things decided for them, and they do not have the freedom to be involved. Therefore, I conclude that I would love to go and educate in that country or in that society, let's put it that way, and empower those women. So pragmatic. It reflects what our society, it either works in our society or it doesn't, and it gives benefits.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that that the allowance of women, and I agree with you, the allowance of women to vote is a good thing, is a morally good thing. Now I'm gonna try and run a counter thought experiment. So there are Islamic countries which restrict women from voting, yet the population of those countries is rapidly growing right now to where probably 25, 50 years, the number of people who follow Islam will double Western civilization. So you could make the argument that the restriction of those women from voting and keeping them as strictly the childbearing is allowing that specific tribe of people to flourish and outpopulate Western civilization. And so my question is, we both agree that it's good for women to vote, but my question is, by what right, if they are flourishing as a tribe and they are outpopulating the competition naturally, then by what right do we have to say, or why would we say that's wrong? Why do we believe that that's even wrong for them to do that?
Well,
why is that wrong?
Straight answer to that would be that depends on what the goal is of society, and I think that humanity multiplying as much as possible isn't necessarily moral or morally good, especially if it comes at the cost of the freedom of women and the ability for women to educate themselves and to be a part of their society. So I look at that as just there being a lot of humans is not necessarily the goal. The goal would also be to have a quality of life and to treat men and women equally as much as possible.
And my question is, where do we get this idea of equal? Because as we objectively look in nature, a pack of lions is not concerned with the equality of the lionesses. The lionesses go out and kill, and the males are the ones that eat first, right? So where do we get this idea? If we're strictly if we don't have any ultimate intrinsic value, and there are no objective moral values and duties, why do we care about equality? Nature in and of itself is, as it's famously said, red in tooth and claw. On what grounds do we say women voting or women having any rights is good? Why is human flourishing any more important or valuable than the flourishing of ants or mice or pigs?
Oh, well, that would be easy for me to answer as a secular humanist. It's because I value humans more, and it is about human morality. So
it's like a species then, right? It's like an appeal, just to my species.
Well, if we're talking about human morality, yes, I include humans in that. Then there's also morality in regards to animals and animal rights and so on. So I don't think the only criteria is species. But why human morality, or morality that affects humans, is important to me is because I am human, and because I ultimately do believe, like I was going to say, and I'm saying right now, that it is a human man-made construct. We do what works, and when something doesn't work for somebody in society, hopefully eventually they will speak up or get help from somebody else who will stand up for them. So, for example, women, that we've been talking about here for a while.
And just to make the record straight, I agree that women should vote.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I really do understand that. And you're asking, how do we get to that? I do think it is by trial and error, and it is from women speaking up, and it is from noticing what humans want as societies, and we get better at that. And I think also the thing that is different from us and other species is that we have our prefrontal cortex, and we are able to imagine and plan a future. We can imagine how much better it would be if everybody would be involved. We can communicate quite successfully, and we can share ideas, and we can educate each other about things that we find important, and we can we have that ability. We can look at our own species objectively, and that's pretty amazing.
You're right. I think that we can look at our species objectively, and one of the things that I guess strikes me in this discussion is that maybe a different illustration is needed to try and drive home my point. Like, so for instance, in the 1800s, the South in America enslaved people, and the Southern economy flourished because of free labor of African Americans. So that seems to work for the South. And I'm not in favor of slavery, but that worked for the South, and the South's economy flourished. So I guess my question is, how do you arrive at even the idea of right and wrong, or why would slavery be wrong? Why wouldn't slavery be good if we're simply the byproduct of, we're just advanced primates that are the byproduct of the evolutionary process? Why would that be wrong?
I don't know about the last bit about being products of an evolutionary process, what that would have to do with it. So well, I can address that in a different question. To me, again, it's like how I'll quickly touch on it. How our species came to be has nothing to do with how we choose to then create societies. And
you broke up. Can you repeat that again? Sorry.
That how we came to be the species that we are has nothing to do with what we choose to do as a society and how we want to build our societies and our moral conduct with each other. I do not think evolution by natural selection is a good model for how to act in society, survival of the fittest, and that, but that theory describes how we came to be in this, how we came to exist as this species that we are, and now what we do with it, because we can think of it, we can have foresight, we can plan, and we can argue with each other and say that this isn't working for me, your ideas aren't working for me. So now to answer that question that you had about slavery, I would say that my main tool of finding what is morally correct, good so to speak, in that situation is my empathy. So I would judge that situation as immoral because I can imagine what it would be like to be a slave and have my freedom taken from me. And I don't want that for other people. And I don't want somebody to profit off of somebody else. And of course, my perspective now is very unique to this time with the history that I've learned from and seeing countless documentaries and reading about these injustices in the world. And I react to that and I think, what would it be like if I were the oppressed one? And I choose to continue to fight for, move towards a world that is more inclusive and regards every human being as equal. Because that's, I don't know where I'm going to,
No, I think
end up.
That's a good answer. And so, you said, you want to fight against these injustices, and then you noted that we have the ability to disagree with one another and say that doesn't work or this doesn't work. But in both of those cases, though, aren't you in the fact that two people can disagree, that kind of insinuates that both people, agree that there is some type of objective moral standard. To say that one action is not just, then there has to be an appeal to an ultimate type, a reference point of justice, which would mean an objective moral value and duty and obligation. And so that seems to me on humanism, and this is where Darwinism or Darwinian evolution plays a part, is that chemicals don't have the ability to adjudicate moral principles. So my point is this, is that Darwinism gives us what is, but Darwinism can't give us what ought to be. Darwinism can describe what goes on, but it doesn't behold me to any type of obligation. I mean, there's never a point in a safari in Tanzania where the park ranger or the tour guide goes out and arrests a lion for killing a zebra and says, you have the right to remain silent. Everything you say and will be used against you in a court of law. But if we were to step out and someone were to kill the park ranger, there would be someone that would come and arrest them and say everything you can and will be used against you in the court of law. And there's no way that in that court of law, the judge asked, well, why did you do this? It said, well, I didn't really murder the guy. I just killed him like the lion killed the zebra. So there is that difference. And I guess my point is, how do we get to that difference? It seems then that there is a difference between the way in which we handle morality. The lion kills the zebra, but it doesn't murder the zebra, right? The bull shark forcibly copulates with the female bull shark, but he doesn't rape the bull shark or doesn't rape the female bull shark. The lion cares nothing about the rights of the zebra or even the rights of a pack that he might invade. We do. We care about the rights. We call that unjust. So it seems to me that on Darwinian evolution, these things might be socially unacceptable. They might be taboo, but that doesn't seem to make them any different than me belching at the dinner table, right? That might be taboo, but there's nothing morally wrong with belching at the dinner table. So I'm just confused at how two people can disagree about a principle such as slavery, and it be one person has this construct, the other person has the construct, and it seems to me that they're both appealing to an objective principle that's outside of themselves, not merely a construct of human society. And that we are different morally from the lion. I mean, I don't think anybody would disagree with that.
But that was loud. That was loud.
No, you're fine.
Okay. That is one of the key things that I, in fact, do think that we disagree on. When we talk about objective morality, I'm talking about objective morality for humankind. I'm appealing to that there are things that we have agreed upon, we have noticed, we have pragmatically found that are not beneficial for us. And so we create laws to protect ourselves and our society from the detriment of these things being kind of allowed and there not being consequences for actions taken. But that objective morality is a construct by man. I'm saying that it is man-made, and you're saying that it is given to us by God.
Yeah.
So when it comes to slavery, and that two people can disagree on that, I think that happens in a that's just it. We need more people to come to consensus and to see that ultimately it is immoral to enslave somebody. And I think also, I'm not an historian, but I'm going to go out on a limb with this one and say that I think slaves weren't viewed as human beings. They weren't given the status of equal to their masters, so to speak. I think education and a new view on humanity and who we include in our human club, so to speak, that also affects how we then act and what we think is good or bad.
I still struggle to see how, if I impose harm on a slave, or if I'm a part of slave trafficking, or if I'm Hitler and the Nazis, hurting the Jews, but my society reaps from that, as Germany did, and as the South did, and as even some human traffickers do. I still struggle to see why, on a non-God perspective, in which objective moral values and duties are grounded in human beings, why that's wrong. I mean, it is entirely possible for a society to have a majority of people who believe an action is right, even if it's to harm somebody. So I still don't see how you can how to ground that as objectively wrong when the society would reap from that action. In the same way, why? I guess my question is, why would it be wrong for the Germans to put Jews in, ovens if ultimately it rallied? If ultimately, as you said, what you talked about, the consequences that are beneficial, the consequences of roasting the Jews in ovens for Germany, the consequence of that was beneficial because it rallied people to the cause of Germany and made Germany, and in part made Germany a world superpower. And I don't see why on a consequential morality why that's wrong. As long as the ends justify the means, why would that be wrong? I mean,
I've never said that the ends justify the means, and I do not think being in that oven is beneficial for the person in the oven.
Yeah, but it's beneficial for Germany. It's beneficial for that society, right? It's not beneficial for the Jew, but the Jews within that German society. And so if the society says it's okay for this to take place, why is that wrong if the society reaps the benefits from that, mainly rallying to the cause of the economic superpower and militaristic power?
Because that worldview is not including all humans. That's the simple answer to that. Again, it was one of the big problems with that situation was that Hitler himself did not view Jews as equal to him, or homosexuals, or and it wasn't
why
just
is
Jews. That was
but my question then is, why is that wrong for that society? Why does that society have to view those people, and by what right do we make that moral value and duty judgment if it's just between you and I? If you and I are the only adjudicators between right and wrong, and it's between you and I to determine what's right and what's wrong, why does it matter? If one society thinks that this is okay and another society thinks that it's not okay. I mean, the consequence from what the Nazis did was that it rallied the country behind Hitler, and they became an economic superpower and got out of the way of the reparations that they had to owe from World War I, which is what they all wanted anyway. So it seems to me that on a humanistic level, Germany flourished because of some of those policies. And I keep coming back to it. My question is, on what basis, on what right do we have to tell the Germans of World War II that they were wrong, or even the human traffickers of girls today? Why is Larry Nassar of Michigan State, who sexually abused at least 150 women for 30 years, why is he wrong? What did he do wrong? Why is he not just acting on his human primal instinct and nature? Why would that be wrong?
Because we humans recognize that situation, all of these examples are infringing on other people's rights, and that's something that we value as a society, as societies, as a global society. I think just saying that, well, yeah, that worked for Germany and such, I think that's quite nearsighted, and probably something that we could call subjective for a few people who would agree on that. I think it's rather obvious, given what we learn about our history, that objectively that is not going to be a good recipe for how we want to continue forward in our world. We don't want to live in a world. I don't want to live in a world where I can be gassed for being female, or for being irreligious, or for being a lesbian, or any of those things.
So let me. Well, I've done a lot of talking. I'll give you a chance to ask me a question. I'm sorry, I've taken up probably too much of the time, but I had a follow up. But you go ahead and ask me a question.
See what I've got here. Children. How do you know what is moral from your point of view? How do you know it? You said it was written on everybody's hearts, and quite obviously humankind is capable of horrific things that we've listed today. Yeah. How would you view this situation? How would you conclude what is moral?
Kind of a little bit of what I said before. I think if morality is simply left to the constructs of mankind, I don't necessarily know that you can ground morality objectively. But from my point of view, I think that one of the things that we can know is that just as my physical senses let me know that there's an objective reality in the world, my moral sense allows me to know what's right and wrong. I know that just as I put my hand on a hot oven and my senses allow me to say, ow, that burns, I also know that when I see an old lady get pushed into the street by somebody that wants to rob her and she gets hit by a car, I also know intuitively that that's wrong. So that's one way in which I know that I come to the conclusion of what's right and what's wrong. But also, as I've stated before, I also believe that it's through revelation. I think that through Scripture, we can come to know what's right and wrong on the basis of having an anchor point. And so it's not that the human society tells me what's right or wrong, because right and wrong in a human society can always change, and you can actually have moral laws that are actually might be considered right, but actually do more harm than good. Whereas in the Bible, Jesus tells me, to love your neighbor as yourself. He tells me, to take care of the poor. He informs me that, something like lusting after women who aren't my wife is wrong. He actually, in Ephesians chapter 5, the text of Scripture tells me that my wife is not just a piece of property, but my wife actually is a cut. I should treat my wife the same way that I treat my body. So he raises the standard of my wife in that regard. So those are ways in which I can know that certain moral truths is my moral sense experience, but also, revelation in Scripture.
And if it would be said in the Bible that women are property somewhere in the New Testament, would you then say that, okay, so that is then true?
I would say that first, I think that may be a little bit of a loaded question, because I'm not aware of a scripture in the New Testament that talks about women being property.
All right, I've heard one, but really the Bible is not my expertise either. Let me put it another way.
Okay.
We know slavery is also exhibited in the Bible. How do we know that? How do we know at which point God, in fact, has raised His standards? How do you differentiate from the Bible verses that are morally beneficial or good as you see them, or those that are bad? Or is the entire Bible good in your mind?
Gotcha. No, I think that's a great question, because I think the issue of slavery is often brought up in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so I'll just say this with regards to slavery and morality. In the Old Testament and the New Testament, slavery was used for a couple of purposes. One, it was used as a form to pay back debt, and two, it was a form of employment, right? So technically, in a sense, if I work for the government, I am in a sense, a type of slave for the government. I'm working for the government by means to get paid. And so that's the sense in which slavery is used both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. In 1 Corinthians 7, it talks about, if you're as a slave, the circumstances you're a slave, glorify God as you're a slave. But also, if you can seek your freedom, go ahead and do that. That's 1 Corinthians 7. So I think in that regard, as I look at slavery, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, those are the modes in which slavery is used. So I don't see a issue with that, given the purpose for being a slave, to pay back a debt, and then once that debt is fully paid back, that person can either stay on as an indentured servant, like a butler or maid, or as a form of employment during the biblical time frame. So I don't see that as an issue. So what was your second question? Is the whole Bible good?
Yeah, is it all good, and how do you know what is like what the good bits
Gotcha.
are and what the bad bits are, or is it all
Gotcha.
good?
Well, no, I certainly think that you have instance of moral goodness and moral badness in the Bible. I mean, just from a strictly theological standpoint, um, we see a divide between God and man on the basis of man acting immorally, right? In which the entire Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, is the story of the repairing of that relationship between God and man. So, in a general sense, yes, the Bible has multiple instances of good and bad taking place. Now, I think the question. Well, I'll let you ask the question. I don't want to presuppose about what you're going to ask. But no, yeah, I think that there are instances of good and bad in the Bible for sure.
Well, the question was just how do you know which ones to implement today in today's society?
Okay. So you're speaking the moral applications, right?
Yes.
Or you just okay. So I think as you look into the New Testament and the Old Testament, you see that as Hebrews chapter 1 talks about, that God's final voice was seen in the life of Jesus Christ, and so the moral precepts that we implement are the ones which Jesus spoke about, and also the ones that also the precepts that came from the apostles and prophets that are linked to Jesus as well, because they carried his word and he said that they would. So those are the moral precepts that we carry. So for instance, to love your neighbor as yourself would be one. The implication as far as marriage, implications as far as things like lust and hate and the need to give to people, the need to support the poor. Those are all moral implications that Jesus talks about, and even some that maybe aren't, or maybe even some that don't come to us as naturally as they might. So to love your enemy, right? To treat well those who persecute you, to go the extra mile, for people that don't do you right. Those are all things that seem to be counterintuitive, but also I believe, if implemented, help create a harmonious society. So yeah.
And I'm wondering why then, if this is written on our hearts, and if we have this manual for how to conduct ourselves morally, why has humanity done so many horrific things and continue to do so?
Well, I think that question is answered in a pretty simple way, that even though I might know what the right thing to do is, I still have the free will to drive against that for some ulterior reason. So for instance, I think everybody knows who's married, that it's wrong to go out, and if I'm married to my wife, which I am, obviously that doesn't really make sense. If I'm married to my wife, I think it's wrong. We all know that as somebody who's committed to my wife, or committed, or even maybe in a more general sense, a partner for society, that it would be wrong for me to be committed to that person and say, I'm going to be with you for the rest of my life, and I'm not going to engage in sexual activity with other people, and then go out and engage in sexual activity with 150 people. That would certainly be wrong. So I might know the right thing to do, but I might have an ulterior motive to do the wrong thing, even though I know the right thing to do. There might be some type of physical benefit from that, and there might even be some type of monetary benefit from that. So that might be a reason why I do that, or maybe there might be it might be a power grab. Why? Yeah, I know that it's wrong to assassinate people, right? But if I assassinate enough people, I might be able to get a stronger position within the government. So we might know the right thing to do, but we still could do it for an ulterior motive. So I guess I could flip that back, flip that back the other way is why would it be wrong if it helps population flourish for mankind not to be polygamous? That's a good question.
I think again it comes to the agreements that we make and the goals that we have. If purely wanting to populate the planet, then I guess polygamy would actually be more effective, just because of biological reasons. But that is not what we consider to be the only goal of humanity, is to just populate. I mean, we don't have really any problems with. We are overpopulated as it is. So quality of life in some areas is diminished because there are too many mouths to feed, so to speak. And when it comes to being married to somebody and what is good and bad in those instances, I think also comes down to the agreement that is made between these two people. So, for instance, if a couple decides together, they have a mutual agreement that we enjoy having sexual relations with people outside of this, our agreement, our legal agreement, and we give each other, it's okay for us. We are entering into this agreement with that agreement with it. I see no moral dilemma there. So it's all about agreement and about what the goal is.
That's a debate about.
We don't always get it right.
Well, so then and I don't want to get off on a conversation about marriage. That's something for another time. We can definitely look at that. So I'll let you go ahead and ask another question if you want to.
Another juicy one.
There you
go. Yeah, I'm still confused about how God really communicates these moral codes and how. See, the interesting thing, I think I'm going to think out loud for a little bit here, is that you're saying that people can fail morally because of free will and because they are not following God's will.
Okay.
And I'm saying that people can fail morally because they are ignorant to the consequences of their actions, or they don't care about the consequence of their actions, that they are selfish and all sorts of things that I see as immoral. I think the broader one's perspective is the more humans you include to your worldview, the more empathy you have, the more moral you will be as a person. What's the real problem here is the way I'm hearing it is the source. I'm thinking we must be responsible as humans of our actions and what we agree upon and what we don't agree upon and how we choose to treat each other. Ultimately, I think it's our responsibility, and it is we are either bothered by those problems or not bothered by those problems. And I think those people who are bothered by the problems and see oppression and want to change that for humanity, they are on a morally superior to those who think that, oh no, that's just those gay people over there. They don't need equal rights to everybody else. I think that is morally unjust.
And I think that's a distinction without a difference that we've made. I think, we would both agree that some people just don't care, about, the consequences of their actions. We know people who don't care about the consequences of their actions, but what I'm trying to suggest is that if values and duties are not one, objective, and if they're not grounded in God, then I don't see a reason why. Just being human isn't I don't necessarily know is enough to give me reason that I'm obligated to treat anyone with any sense of value or purpose outside of fulfilling my own wants, needs, or desires, in the same way that a lion, does that, or a troop of baboons do that, or a cheetah does that. It just seems to me that if there is no intrinsic value within mankind on the basis of God existing, could you? I mean, maybe this is a different conversation, but and see that we've just degraded into speciesism. Our value comes from the fact that we are human, and we're obligated because we are human, and being human is the best species, obviously, to be. And so, I don't understand why I'm obligated, why I ought to treat somebody in a good way, if I'm merely, regardless of what my mental faculties are, if I'm simply matter, a bag of chemicals that fizz. Why am I obligated to treat anything else that fizzes differently than me in a moral way?
Yeah, I find that so bizarre. I'm sitting here listening, and to me that just sounds so bizarre, and I think I need to put some words together to express why that sounds so bizarre to me. Because we are more than chemicals, aren't we? We have faculties. We have the ability to be empathetic. It's like you're drawing up a picture of humans that are not humans, that we're just animals that run around, and we're slaves to our instincts and all that. And we are far beyond slaves to our instincts. We still have a primitive brain that gets irrational and gets scared and gets defensive and all that. But then we have a fantastic prefrontal lobe that can actually sit with those problems and realize that we're not being attacked, and we can counter our instincts because our fantastic brain.
Yeah,
that's something that we do.
It seems to me on Darwinism, that's what we are. We are still animals. We're still, Homo sapiens that might be slightly more advanced than our predecessors and whatnot. And it still seems to me that we tend to still be on Darwinism. Seems that we are in a large majority, in a large part, slaves to our instincts, that whatever adaptive behaviors us to survive, those are the ones that we'll adopt, not because because we are necessarily intrinsic, but because we do what we do in order to survive. That's essentially what it seems to be on Darwinism. I don't know how you can.
We're really good at surviving, and one of the things that has made for truly successful societies is also that we have worked together, and we have noticed that we have friends that we can get together and do things for each other and be much more effective as a group than we are as single individuals. And that has, even from different tribes that would then fight each other, we have evolved in society. And the bigger the smaller our world gets, the more we realize that we are the same all around the world.
Yeah.
The more empathetic we are, the better we are at being moral.
So then
I don't get the problem.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Do you need to go ahead? Go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't want to cut you off.
Oh.
Well, because that kind of leads into my last question is, if we are the product of Darwinian evolution, and multiple times through our discussion, you've mentioned the idea of being empathetic, you've mentioned the idea of justice, you mentioned the idea of love and be able to cooperate. Where do these things how are these things produced? How are these non-physical things produced by a physical process, such as like, love? Love can't be measured on a weight scale. Justice can't be measured in the lab. It's not like the scientist goes over to the other scientist, hey, this is what I need from the back of the lab. I need 5 pounds of justice, 3 pounds of love, and then 2 pounds of empathy. And hey, we're going to make, these things. It seems to me that you can't get these abstract entities, these non-physical entities, for instance, like the laws of logic. There's no test that you can run with the scientific method that can get you the laws of logic. There's no test that I could run to access directly something like love or justice. So I guess my question is, how do these non-physical entities that we appeal to come via a physical process that's variation based on natural selection and random mutation? How does that happen? How can you observe that?
To observe that for our actions and our faculties and our abilities, how that happens, how an electromagnetic signal in our brain turns into an abstract concept. I think you would have to invite a neuroscientist on to maybe enlighten us on that. But yeah, we can imagine, we can put a problem in our minds and work it out in our minds. We have the ability to create wonderful languages and mathematics and tools, different tools. I think the laws of logic are also tools for us to work on problems. I don't think they are physical things. These are ideas and concepts that we use to categorize and work out our environments.
Yeah.
And in science, I've yet to understand that we would use laws of logic as evidence for anything, that they are also tools. The evidence comes in observation and things that we can, in fact, measure and observe. And when you observe things, yeah, you get a clearer picture. And that's never really absolute either, because we could get more information that would change that picture for us, make it even more clearer, and thus give us a greater understanding of what our universe really is and how it really works. But again, with the I have to say it, the theory of evolution by natural selection is not a moral code. It merely describes how humans have come to be, or all species actually have come to be.
Yeah.
It's about speciation and how that happened. It's not a moral guide of any sort. And I think that's really valuable to understand what evolution by natural selection really is. Also that it's not a random process, which I heard once today, and I hear it every other day, and it really becomes quite frustrating, because it is the part of by natural selection makes it for not an entirely random process.
Well,
that there is a selection there happening.
Yeah.
Not anything can happen. It is very much tied into
it weeds out the weak aspects and selects that which is apt for survival. And so I guess if Darwinian evolution is not a moral code, right? And then obviously, if God doesn't suffice, if God doesn't exist and doesn't give and doesn't create us with these properties, then how do those properties come to be? I mean, because and the only qualm that I have really, Linda, with Darwinian evolution not as moral code, technically, on a very technical level, you're absolutely right. I can't look and say, Darwinian evolution is equal to something like love, right? I don't go around and say, well, I Darwinian evolution today, right? Nobody does that. But it seems to me that in the absence of God, the only other way in which these things could possibly be produced is through that process. And that's a physical process. And so my question still remains is that how does that process, I know it's not a moral code, but how does that process natural selection through mutation produce abstract entities like love and justice, and and logic. And how does that take place, given that I can't directly access love? Love is a metaphysical property, not a physical property.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just met some new friends a week ago, and we spoke about love and that being and also we spoke about the usage of words and words meaning. Do they have inherent meaning or not? I think love is one of those really fuzzy words. I think when you would poll people to ask them what they mean by love, you would get quite varying answers to that. Also, love, when we look at pictures that make us feel what we describe as love, there is a raised level of oxytocin in the brain, which kind of would be a physical representation of a chemical happening in our brains because we like something or love something. And I guess this is my guess because I have not studied this. But as far as I understand the theory of evolution by natural selection, it would appear that the sensation of love, of caring for something, especially with little babies. I mean, people who have had a baby, they know this. They will do anything for that child. They will jump in front of traffic for that baby. And especially human babies that really cannot take care of themselves. They're not like running around in the yard as soon as they're born. They are dependent on the parents. So it makes, to me, perfect sense that we develop that type of love and that obsession to protect and take care of that baby, because then more babies survive. And we need intense feelings of love and protectiveness of our babies because they need us for longer than a lot of other species animals do. And yeah, that was just one example of how something like love, the very, very fuzzy word of love, can come to be through necessity also.
Well, I don't know. I see that you could have a sensational experience that makes you feel good and it still not be categorized as love. I mean, I'm sure, you ask anybody that's ever committed adultery, they say, well, what happened in the moment? Well, in that moment, while I was with somebody else, I felt a sensation, a release of what's the word that she used? The chemical that was released in the brain?
Oxytocin.
Yeah, there's a chemical release of oxytocin towards this person, and I ended up sleeping with her, but that doesn't necessarily mean I loved her, right? So, I mean, just because we have those chemical or sense experiences doesn't necessarily that in that moment while I'm feeling those senses that I've actually loved something. I could simply be fulfilling I could simply be meeting a physical desire through the use of somebody else. But it's just, and I know we might be getting, off topic here as far as that, but it seems to me with the ability to, for instance, love, to use the laws of logic, the fact that I have a conscience. I mean, how does conscience come? I mean, the way in which we know morality is because we have a conscience. The lion has no conscience towards the zebra, right? I've used that before. So how is conscience, it seems to me on the basis of conscience is a non-physical, once again, a non-physical entity, and it's hard to get a non-physical entity. It's hard to explain a non-physical entity through a physical process. And I'll give you, I mean, this is your show. That's kind of my last word on it. I see that it's 12:30.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
So that's just my deal. I'll give you it's your show. I'll let you have the last frame, and then unfortunately I've got to roll out.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This has been so interesting.
Yeah.
that I didn't keep track of the time. But I'm glad you let me know so we can wrap things up. Just the last thing I would like to say about non-physical properties or entities as you describe the choice of word that you used, how they could possibly come out of something physical. People feel things, and feelings are a big part of being human, and they also gauge a lot of the things that we do. Is kind of the way the body, the mind communicates to the body and the mind of different types of needs, psychological needs and biological needs. So there's a whole lot of things going on there with hormones and such, and so I do think we have a pretty good theory on that as well. Like there are non-physical, so to speak, things that we can utilize and such. But that's a whole different conversation.
Hey, 1 second. I'll be right back. I just spilled coffee.
Oh no. Yeah, but I'm going to wrap up things for now. Don't know how great my questions have been today. I definitely need to practice. Yeah. And I noticed that little Miss Know-It-All came out today. Wanted to say a lot about a lot of things. I think this would be more beneficial if I just asked more questions. So please leave comments in the comment section on that. How can I improve? How can we make this conversation better, or this type of conversation better? I appreciate all feedback. So Dean, I was just saying to the viewers that I'm looking forward to everybody's feedback in the comment section of this page, and that I hope to be able to improve my questions. I'm not sure how effective this communicating style is, and we can experiment some more some other time. I really do appreciate Dean you being on and wanting to have this conversation on these really tough subjects with me.
Yeah, it's good stuff, and I appreciate your questions and just the attitude in which you approach the whole conversation. I hope that everybody noticed that while you and I disagree, there wasn't any point in time where either one of us was going to jump through the screen and rip each other's heads off.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. And, so yeah, thank you, Dean, for coming. And do you want to say anything, any thank yous or any? No, you just said that, didn't you? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I thought I would wrap up with something that
Thank you for putting up with me.
Oh, thank you for putting up with me too. I need some practice with this interviewing and conversations and staying on topic, and
it is A-okay.
There are a lot of things to learn. But yes, in conclusion, because I wrote a little conclusion thing here, just about why it's great to be open to conversation and to have our deeply held beliefs and our ideas challenged, possibly, softly, in a friendly way, and at least to meet up for conversations, is that if we would not be open to have our ideas and ideologies discussed, I think we are condemning ourselves and each other to having entire thoughts, worlds of thoughts. I'm doing this so horribly because it's when I start reading something. That's okay. I'm just going to read it straight from the paper now. So in conclusion, not being open to having one's ideas and ideologies discussed is like condemning one's entire world of thought to minimal growth and secured isolation. People do not have to agree, but we desperately need to communicate. No one is an island. So that was what I wrote earlier today.
Awesome. Cool deal.
Yeah. Well, and I know that you agree with that, so thank you so much for coming.
Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I've got a jet. Thank you once again, and we will get together and chat some more. Okay?
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you for being here. Bye, Dean.
No problem. Bye.
So that was conversation 2, the second topic I had. Yeah, please leave comments and feedback. I desperately need it, I feel. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it had some value for somebody. And catch you guys next time. Have a nice Saturday and Sunday, or whatever day it is when you are watching this. Bye for now. Linda Mocko from the Super Curious channel, signing off.